Welcome to Diagnosing Dx, the podcast giving diagnostics the platform it deserves. While therapeutics and devices often take centre stage, diagnostics is the engine driving precision medicine. I'm your host, David Filby, and each week we spotlight the innovators, breakthroughs, and real-world challenges shaping the future of DX. This week on Diagnosing DX, I'm joined by Thomas Briggs, Chief Growth Officer at RedDrop Diagnostics. We get into one of the most overlooked parts of diagnostics, blood collection, and why the process still looks far too similar to what it did decades ago. Thomas breaks down where ARM-based microsampling could genuinely change patient experience, from paediatrics and neurodivergent patients to home testing, clinical trials, and difficult vein access, and what it actually takes to build a commercial business around a medtech product like this. Thomas, welcome to the show this week. How are you?
Doing excellent. Enjoying the summer here in the US. So it's starting to get very warm.
Just in time for the World Cup. Probably too warm to be playing football, soccer, but especially down in like Florida. But they're going to do it anyway. So
yeah, I think the water breaks are going to be mandatory in those games.
I think they have to. Yeah. And where in the US are you?
About an hour north of Philadelphia. So
okay, yeah. So nice time of year to be kind of to the northeast.
Yeah,
right?
it's finally feeling like summer up here. So
yeah, love it. Well, we've got a really interesting episode to record with you this week, which I'm super interested to get into. But before we do that, we always like to give the guests an opportunity to give an intro to themselves and their background and career. So if you want to sort of bring us up to speed, and then we'll get into RedDrop.
My name's Thomas Briggs. I'm currently the Chief Growth Officer at RedDrop Diagnostics. And I've been in the role since January, so about 6 months. I'm a trained molecular biologist. I have my master's in molecular biology. And then also I have my MBA in marketing and management. We're kind of the yin and yang approach, having a business background and a science background. And so I spent about the first 12 to 15 years of my career in pharma and big diagnostic companies for Abbott, Merck, Johnson & Johnson, and Becton Dickinson. And over the last, I'd say, 3 years, I've been into the startup realm. So it's been kind of a complete flip from what I was used to, but getting into the startup realm and kind of building businesses and kind of taking technologies to new heights and opening markets. So I think that for me is much more exciting than kind of the corporate world versus, kind of having the ability to build something. And I think that's what really gets me going and excites me a lot. So being in the med diagnostic field now and with all the kind of new innovations, it's a very exciting space, and I'm loving every minute of it.
That's great. And you've almost worked for a who's who of big corporations, but has it always had a diagnostics leaning through your career?
Actually, when I started at Merck, and I was working in some of the vaccine production. So I've worked on some really interesting products. So the measles, mumps, and rubella vaccine that all the children get, I was on that project, and I was in the lab doing RNA and DNA analysis for patients who took the drug. And then I went to Abbott, and I was on the Humira program. So I was on the patent for Humira. It just expired a couple of years ago, and that really makes you feel old when you get a letter in the mail from the U.S. government saying your patent's expired, because that means you did it 17 years ago. So it makes you feel a little bit old, but you kind of see these products that you developed in the pharma space kind of become products, and you see commercials for them. And then I kind of went more into the diagnostic space at Johnson & Johnson for cancer detection and cancer staging. And then from there, I got my MBA and then started going into more of the business development side and, growing business and business strategy side but using that in the space of science and molecular biology and blood for the most part.
Right. So how long were you in scientific roles before you went back and did your MBA and sort of added on or went down a commercial path?
So I was in my scientific roles for about 6 years. And then I had a mentor at J&J, so I gave a project presentation on a cancer staging diagnostic that I was developing. And the VP of sales pulled me aside, and he's like, "We need to talk." And I'm like, "Am I in trouble? What did I say wrong?" And he pulled me into his office and said, "I'm gonna support you and nominate you for the MBA program." He's like, "Because when you talk science, I understand it, and I've never taken a science class in my life outside of high school." And we're talking about advanced molecular biology stuff, and he's like, "Go get your MBA, and you're going to be very, very, very satisfied with the results, because if you can speak science and have a business background, there's so many opportunities for you in the med device world." And so I took that to heart. And that's when I started my program. And I did it, part-time at nights because I still had my job working in the lab. And I got my degree. It took me 6 years to do, but I got it in 2008, my MBA. So I pretty much had it for 18 years now. So once I got that, I made the transition into more of a business development role and sales roles.
Mm. Yeah, interesting. So it it's quite often a very natural transition, right? Because it's almost a personality thing that
Yes.
that organically comes
Mhm.
up where people just feel that they've got the scientific background and understanding, but they're being pulled in a different
Yes.
direction and motivated by different things. So it's
Mhm.
awesome that somebody's seen that in you and was able to sort of give you that platform. That's great.
Yeah, yeah, and that's something I've always like one of those inflection points in life. You always look back like, what if I didn't do that? But I'm glad I did. And now, like later in my career, when I was at Becton Dickinson, I was a part of the mentoring program. So I had mentees come to talk to me about this same scenario.
Yeah.
And I just love being able to kind of pull that forward. And even after I left Becton Dickinson, my mentees still call me on a weekly basis and we talk just about what they should do and kind of how their careers are progressing. So I always find, giving back that way is very satisfying to be able to help people make those decisions that really help them along in their lives and with their careers as well.
Yeah, great. And talk to me about your startup experience then. So it's been
Mhm.
3 years now, and a few different firms. How's the startup world been treating you?
It's hectic. It's a lot different than the corporate world. I mean, a day to day is very different, but I wouldn't change it for the world. Well, I joined Your Bio Health in October 24, and they were struggling, and they need a new leadership team to kind of build the product up and get it ready for sale for acquisition. And then in 16 months, we got the company to an acquisition state, and it was bought by Hims and Hers Health to include in some of their home sampling programs. So that was a really good experience to kind of build it and get it all the way to the point of an acquisition, and working with the venture capital firms that wanted to get their investment back out. So kind of seeing it from a different standpoint versus in a corporate world, you're kind of just working on projects and day to day, and it just keeps going. This one is far more dynamic and far more. I think for me, your efforts are immediately visible in a startup world because there isn't 18 layers of things to going on. It's kind of really visible, and you can affect something very quickly, which I like. As a scientist, I like to see results. So
Mm.
in big corporate world, you do a project for 4 years to finally see a result. In the startup world, it might be 4 weeks. So I like that kind of that satisfaction of seeing those results with kind of my science background.
Yeah. What was the product at Your Bio?
It was a arm-based blood collection device.
Hmm.
So you would put it on, press the button, and a little microtube would fill with blood. And then you could use that blood for analysis, like for a CBC or a metabolic panel, lipid panels, those types of things. You could look at from small amounts of blood. So it's really trying to take the blood collection away from like the hospitals and the big patient service centers like your Quests and LabCorps and take it and put it into the home or even the doctor's office where the doctor, because we all go to the doctor and say, okay, now at your yearly checkup here, go get these blood tests for, the general health blood test where they could actually have the device grab that sample and send it in themselves from the office. So you would kind of eliminate that step in the process. And I don't know about you, but if I would get a blood draw order, usually it goes on the back of my calendar and I forget about it until about a day before my next doctor appointment and I run out and get it. So I don't get
Yeah.
yelled at. Um, so I think that can kind of like streamline healthcare. And also I think from the healthcare standpoint, um, get people, I think, be more proactive about their healthcare and be able to track things earlier and learn earlier about potential conditions. Because I think if you skip the blood test, you kind of lose a lot of value for your doctor to see something early. And I think that's a big part of it as well and help with the compliance part for blood collection.
Why did it make sense for, in your opinion, as a product fit for Hims and Hers? Why would
Yeah.
that be a smart acquisition? What was their vision for the product?
So right now, as you know, they're doing a lot of GLP-1 and a lot of sexual health drugs.
Mm.
And people need to have blood tests to be able to kind of measure. Like if you're on testosterone treatment, you want to know what your baseline is. What is your baseline? So sending them a home kit to take that blood collection, send it back, and then say your testosterone is this level, and we would recommend this treatment at this dosing. So it can really help
Mm.
manage the treatment programs and also show progress. So then like 6 months later, okay, your testosterone is like, 2 points higher because of this program. Or with the
Mm.
GLP-1s, we're seeing even in some of the TV advertisements talking about blood tests. And with GLP-1s, people are losing weight, so you want to see your HbA1c levels drop. You would want to see maybe your lipid levels drop because you're losing weight. And you also want to make sure, like with some of these drugs, there is some indications about thyroid cancer. So having a thyroid panel tagged to that to make sure that you're not negatively affecting your body as well, besides the positive of losing the weight and having the benefits from your HbA1c or your lipid panels, but make sure you're not negatively affecting it as well. So to kind of track that. So I think those are areas where you can kind of play into these direct-to-consumer drugs, but then also make sure that they're taking them right and they're still healthy overall.
Really exciting space at the moment, isn't it? The sort of the grey area between diagnostics and wellness
Right.
and giving people access to their own data. That probably ties really nicely into the RedDrop Diagnostics and your
Yep.
role there. So give us an intro. Who are RedDrop Diagnostics and what's your role with them?
Yeah, so we're a small medical device manufacturer. We manufacture the RedDrop 1 device. So this is a device where you can see has a little switch here. You would put it on your upper arm, pull the switch down, and there's see on here, and this might not be the best for a video, but there's two little V-shaped slits there.
Yeah.
The little microneedles come out, pierce the skin, and then the blood will flow down into the tube, and you can use this tube for testing. So it's a really, really good concept, virtually pain-free. It's like a 1 on the Long-Baker pain scale, and that pain scale goes from 0 to 9. So venipuncture, I think, is usually around the 3 or 4 on that scale, so it's much less painful than a venipuncture, and it's much easier to get. So you can see a doctor could do this. It's just pull a switch, and even in the future, getting a home-based clearance on this is kind of one of the next steps for the whole industry for these arm-based devices, because currently they are cleared as lancets, FDA cleared as a lancet for HCP use, so for healthcare professional use. But the next step, I think, in this market is to take that next step and get a home collection clearance so that lay users can use it for diagnostic testing instead of just wellness testing like what we're seeing currently.
How does the product compare then to a your bio that you've just come? Because obviously similar realms and similar fields. So what's the comparison and the differentiators?
So the comparison is, I have one of your bio devices too, so we can do side by side. So your bio device here has a plunger. It's a little bit, kind of unwieldy there, and it looks like you would be pushing this whole length into your arm, which wouldn't be good. But also, your bio has in there, they have a little microneedle array. So in there, there's 30 little microneedles that pierce the skin and allow for the blood to flow. Ours has about six little bit bigger microneedles that pierce the skin and let the blood flow. So it's a lot of kind of the same process about a piercing and not a laceration. And I think that's very important with these devices, is that if it's a cut, it's a laceration, it takes longer to heal, and there's potential for scarring. Where if it's a puncture, it's a much cleaner wound, and they heal very well, and you don't get scarring. So I think that's a really interesting kind of caveat with devices like this, is a puncture versus a laceration. And I think so we have a puncture, but then we also have a little bit higher blood volume. So our device is about 750 microliters on average. The Eurobio devices are around 500 or so. So there's a higher volume there, because if you go too low in the volume, you don't have enough material to do all the testing you need. And I think that's the balance here. You need enough blood to do the testing, but you don't want too little blood, because it won't be useful downstream. Remember, you might be able to test 1 analyte or 2 analytes. So that's kind of what we're playing for. And that's what I hear in the field a lot, is we want more blood. But with your capillary beds, you're always going to be restricted, right? It's not like you have a vein where you can pull as much blood as you want. It's a capillary bed. It's a small location. There's only a certain amount of blood that can come out of that footprint. So that's what we're dealing with right now, is trying to maximize the blood collection, but also knowing that you have a small footprint. So there's going to be a limit to what you can get out.
And where do you see the commercial direction then for RedDrop versus your bio that have ultimately been acquired and now hims and hers are using it for self-use to ultimately feed their wider purpose and organization? Where does RedDrop, where does the commercial strategy come into it, and where are you seeing the most uptake, or where do you see the future potential for where this product is going to be utilized the most?
Yeah, I think there's a few avenues here. I think the direct-to-consumer market's obvious, like for your sex hormone testing, testosterone replacement, estrogen replacement, your GLP-1s. That kind of market's already kind of there. And I think getting into those markets for home collections are kind of the immediate market. But then also, I think something I've always had since my days at Becton Dickinson is the pediatric collection market. I think, I was asked for 10 years, do you have something, a smaller tube for pediatrics that's not a finger stick, right?
I
And
hate the
not a
finger
venipuncture.
sticks, by the way. I
Oh,
hate the finger sticks.
me too. And then you get a finger stick, and then you try to type, and you feel it for the next 7 days, and it's just like bang. Oh, and we're all typing every day, so it just you're like, oh, you know.
Yeah.
Um, I got that question. What do you have that can get me blood from a pediatric patient that's not a venipuncture, because peds are really hard to get a needle in because those veins are very small, and not a finger stick? So that was always the kind of thing I've heard for 10 years. And when I started with Eurobio, I'm like, this is the solution in pediatrics. This is the fit. This fits with what they want. And so I think that's one market that we could put this in, say primary care pediatrician's office. Grab a sample, do a lead test, because a lot of states require lead testing in the first year of life. That's a perfect application. Grab a sample, send it in, you get your lead test done. The parent doesn't have to take more time off and go to a secondary blood draw site and have a venipuncture or a finger stick on the child. It could be a very easy experience where they could do it right in the doctor's office. It's done, and it's a very comfortable environment for the child as well, and a very no pain environment too. So it's very. I think the anxiety level for the parent drops significantly in there. So I think that's a really interesting market for a device like this. I don't think this device is a device you're going to put everywhere, because the blood volume is small. So, we're not going to try to replace all venipunctures everywhere, because sometimes you do need 7 vials of blood to do a panel of testing. But there's other cases where you're only looking for a few markers. So this might be the perfect application for that. And one market that we're developing is over in Europe, in the NHS in England. They found great use for microsampling, arm-based microsampling, for their autistic and neurodivergent patients.
Okay.
Because a lot of times it's very difficult to get a blood draw, venipuncture. You have to hold the child down, have 3 people, and just the experience is awful. So this could be where the parent could even put the device on with the doctor to collect the sample, and it's a much more calm experience, and it's pain-free. So it's a really good kind of application for a device like this. And they've had some great results. Dr. Karen Perkins over there with the NIGH has done a lot of presentations on it, and it's just a really good application and a great fit for a patient base. So that's another one. And then also in the major hospitals, I see there's a market here as well for patients with difficult vein access. Because about 30 to 40% of people have difficult veins, and that means you're trying to go multiple times and try to get a venipuncture, which costs a lot of money. Whereas you could put a device on this, and your vein access doesn't matter, because your capillary beds are at the surface of your skin. It's easy access because they're there. You just heat the skin, and they're there to be able to do that collection. So I think that could really play into the difficult vein access as well, and decrease costs in the hospital for difficult vein access. Working in the U.S. medical systems, decreasing costs on things is a very big priority. So if you can kind of show something will in certain situations, that's where you can find adoption of products like this.
Yeah, interesting. And is the industry and the market well developed, or is there still an element of education and awareness for this type of device and product where you're going into new markets? Like you can use pediatricians as the obvious example. When you're going into them, is there still an element of, oh, we haven't even thought about this yet, but this is a great idea? Or is it now, because there is other companies, you obviously, Eurobio, you worked for one before, but how developed is the industry itself for sort of pain-free, easy, blood draw?
I think in like the direct to consumer space, I think it's much more developed. I think it's being used much more frequently. But in the hospital pediatrician managed healthcare space, they see a device like this, and their eyes just open wide up. They're like, I didn't know this existed. That's their response, and they're like, I don't believe it. Number 2, and we're like, okay, give me your arm. we're gonna test you right now. And then they're like, you did it, and then there's blood in the tube. Like, oh my God, this is the greatest thing. So I think right now we're at the point in the market of education. We're trying to educate as many people as possible about the ability of these, and then also in that space, doctors are like, oh, I need to take 3 vials of 5 mils each to send to Quest and LabCorp. And I think that's a piece where you're taking 3 vials and you're testing for lead. Lead and HbA1c and like a lipid panel. You need less than 100 microliters of serum or plasma to do that, but you're taking 15 mils of blood total. So I think there's a mentality of what you actually need. And then also on the backside of that is the labs. the labs accepting smaller amounts and validating those smaller amounts with the platforms they have. And that comes to a next step of working with some of the platforms. I'm working on a project called Project Comfort over in the EU, which is a microsampling initiative run by, I think it was like 15 pharma companies, med device companies, and also the instrument manufacturers to say, how can we use microsampling to benefit clinical trials? And can we
Mm.
get the same data from a home collection as a, you know, on-site collection for these clinical trials? Can we decentralize this? And so that's a project that we're working with like the Roches, the Abbotts, the Siemens of the world, and they're all working on their instruments to use less and less sample per test. I know on the Roche system for a comprehensive metabolic panel, you need 57.5 microliters of plasma or serum, which is a tiny
Mm.
amount.
Yeah.
57 microliters really is the volume wise is a drop of blood.
Yeah.
You know, so I mean that's how small they can get down to, and they're really kind of being more efficient with their platforms as well. So I think it's a time we can have efficiency on the blood collection side, but you also need that back end to have the lab efficiency to make everything work. And so I think that's where we're growing together to create that market.
Yeah, interesting. And so where are the company as we speak in terms of what's the sort of story up until now in terms of starting, development, commercialization, and the milestones you've already achieved?
Yeah, it's been entirely self-funded, and it's very, very small and been kind of bootstrapped together by an engineer, and they found this kind of technology and developed it. We haven't gone a lot of venture capital or anything like that. It's kind of been just really bootstrapped together and been very cautious. We've seen some startups go out and raise a lot of money and waste a lot of money on things like marketing and all these types of things, and to not get a result. Whereas I think the money has been judiciously spent here to develop a really good product first. And then, okay, now that we have the product that's very durable and it's very easy to use, now we can start amplifying it and creating more inventory and starting to take it out in the market once we know it's a high quality product. So that's where we're at right now. And that growth stage where increasing the visibility and increasing our manufacturing capabilities to really try to build into the market appropriately.
And so the device is available and already being utilized and
Yes.
commercialized?
Yep. So the device is available, and we're commercially selling it. We have a variety of customers. We see a lot of interest in kind of the clinical trial space, which you would expect. We see a lot of interest in the direct to consumer space, which you would expect. And we're just starting now building into the managed healthcare systems, the pediatrician's office, to build that visibility. So that's where we're kind of working towards right now. But, it's been good. We've got this device out in the customer's hands. They love it. And it's just trying to figure out how to best use it and then how to tie it with the instruments that they're using as well. Because especially in the managed care, they've been used to taking high, venipuncture tubes and sending them down to the core lab, and that's it. It's almost kind of working with them to figure out how to be able to process these. And I think that's one of the bigger hurdles as well in the space.
Yeah, and so, but can't remember how many, if at all, bootstrapped
Yeah.
med device companies we've ever had on the show. I mean, it's rare, isn't it?
Yeah.
Obviously, for obvious reasons, developing products is expensive.
Mm-hmm.
Was there an intent behind that in terms of purposely trying to avoid VC money for more than just the money? Because you hear stories now as well in many industries about how VCs have sort of gone a different direction. They're not actually really supporting early stage sort of seed level rounds anymore. And that's a shame that they've sort of almost moved up the food chain and they're looking at bigger things.
Right.
But also there's companies that get into bed with VCs and regret it. Was there a reason behind sort of avoiding the sort of VC pool?
Well, it was before my time. I've only been here 6 months, but I think having more control and avoiding kind of the typical VC push, right? And we want a 10x return, and we don't care how we get it, versus kind of controlling it and making the best product possible. And I think that's kind of where we landed, or where they landed, when they were making the decision. But I think I've seen it from both sides.
Yeah.
At Your Bio, we were completely funded by Flagship Pioneering, major VC, right?
Yeah. So, yeah.
And so there were a lot of demands from working with a major VC for a small startup in med device, because med device isn't pharma, isn't biotech. It's not a lottery ticket business. Right? I always say that with kind of the biotechs and pharmas is you could buy or invest in a biotech or pharma for 2 billion and turn it to a $500 billion business with one drug.
Yeah.
Med device is more of you have a device and you can slowly build it. There's not that rocket ship. It's kind of more of a gradual build. And I think that's something VCs have a hard time understanding in med device because you're selling into hospitals. You're selling in these places where the decision timeline takes a long time and you have to build it. And there's a lot of price concerns in these spaces. So you can't have huge margins either because you won't be able to sell any product. So it's a much more kind of stable growth model that VCs, I don't think, have seen or are comfortable with the other things they invest in. They're looking for those quick, rocket ship growth, IPO out. And the med device is a lot different space than that. So I think it's good that we're not in that space from a RedDrop. So it allows us the chance to build a market at our speed, and not have that pressure of when are you going to quadruple your growth in the next 3 months, those types of conversations. So,
Yeah. And so you coming on board as a chief growth officer this year, is that an indication of where RedDrop are in their journey, that now it is about expansion and commercial growth, whether that's through education and awareness or through ultimately revenue generation, partnerships and so forth?
yeah, I think that's definitely a sign is like my background going into the big medical centers and working with them to build, the model out is one of the reasons I joined is because I had the experience in that market working at Becton Dickinson and at Eurobio, working with major medical centers and managed care to build the story of why we should put a device like this in, because you can't just go in there and say, okay, this is a great device. They're like, okay, we're going to buy it. You actually have to have your clinical value propositions, why would save them money, why it would be better for their patients, and have this all nailed down and make sense to them on a monetary side as well. And I think that's the piece that, I've learned through my experience. And that's why I was brought over to help kind of guide that segment growth and build that segment while we're growing our business.
Yeah, it makes sense. And so how are you guys set up to succeed from here? And how have you built a business that can thrive, not just a product?
We're actively looking at ways to increase our manufacturing capacity in a way that really would drop our COGS, and so that we can be very, very competitive in price.
Mm,
And especially when you start looking at, like, in the direct to consumer market, it's not as competitive because it's a willingness to pay in that market. There's a willingness to buy $100 kit or something like that. Versus in the managed care, these hospitals want everything for pennies, right? Because that's the way they do it. So I think that's going to play into our push into managed care, is if we can kind of increase our manufacturing capacity, decrease our COGS, which then can decrease our price, but we can still have a sizable margin to be able to, run the business, but we can get into these spaces that are very price sensitive. And I think that's kind of what we're looking at doing, and be able to kind of build our capacity so that we can manage that a lot better.
And that would involve two completely different type of marketing business development strategy, right? In terms of going into healthcare systems
Oh, yes.
versus direct to consumer. So
Yep.
so is there two ongoing strategies there that you're building and implementing as we speak?
Yes, yes. So there's multiple like strategies in these different situations. If I'm talking to direct to consumer company, they don't care about the clinical value proposition of replacing a phlebotomist. They're like, I don't care. They're like, I just want a device that works, and how cheaply can I get it and put it in my kit and send it out the
Mm,
door? And does the analyte I want, is it comparable with capillary and venipuncture?
yeah,
And that's all they really care about. Versus on the managed healthcare side, it's the red tape. You have to go through committees. You have to go through purchasing. And I think that's a much different sell, and it's a much
yeah,
longer sell. I mean, you're looking at a sales window of 12 to 16 months. From a start of a pilot study all the way through the hospital buying the product. So it's a long wait, but in the end, if you can get 1% of the blood draws at a hospital, that's a pretty big number for a startup company, right? I mean, how many billions of blood draws are done a year? If we can get 1% of those, that's a huge win for a small company. So,
yeah.
and that's what we're looking at, because our markets they're not the biggest markets when you're looking at maybe autistic children, pediatrics, difficult vein access. But when you kind of lump them together, there's a sizable little market there for a company in the startup realm that could really, really make a difference.
Yeah, that makes sense. Okay, what are the future milestones we should keep a lookout for in the next sort of 12, 24 months, and
Yeah.
to see how RedDrop are doing for people that want to follow the story?
Yeah, I think one of the things is working on getting the home collection clearance with the FDA here in the U.S. I think that's the kind of the keystone to everything in this market. I think once you get that, I think that opens up a lot of doors in a lot of markets, and then people start really believing in the technology. I
Mm.
think for us, we are not cleared in Europe yet. So I think getting a Europe and the CE mark and then going over and getting the IVDR in the UK. I think those are two other big programs that we need to do to unlock kind of those markets because the UK is really forward in microsampling and
Mm.
home collections. I was spurred by COVID, but there's a lot of companies and even the NHS does a lot of home collections now. So I think that's a really interesting market for home collections and kind of personalized devices like this. So I think the UK is a great market, and then the EU as well. I think that'll be the next one. So I think that's where getting those clearances, I think would be the kind of some of these major milestones for us to kind of really expand our market and build the market to the level we need.
Fantastic. And so your overview and perspective of the diagnostics market as a whole, especially as a company that's
Mhm.
partnering with diagnostics companies, for their at home
Yeah.
use, and what's your view on the industry and the landscape we're in for 2026?
I think there's a lot of excitement. I mean, I'm seeing a lot of, even over the last 4 or 5 months, a lot of companies going into and marketing home collections, home-based blood tests. A lot of new markers are coming out, like for Alzheimer's and those types of things. And if, you could do that in a home collection setting, think about that market. I see even like in some of the HIV PrEP drugs and HIV monitoring drugs, there's a lot of required blood testing that patients have to go into the doctor's office for. What if it could just be a home collection kit? Just send it home and boom, they grab that sample and send it back, and that's it. So I think there's a lot of these markets that can be really built with these types of technologies and making them more available. So I think that's one of the pieces. And then also working with the testing companies themselves with the instrumentation. I think having the ability to use lower amounts of blood on the big platforms is going to be a key because you can't have all this volume with blood collection and not have the ability to process it in an efficient way. Because a lot of times you have to handle these microtainers a little bit more than you would a venipuncture tube. So how do we make that more efficient and more streamlined? And so some of these companies may have to invest in how to do that for the instruments. And I think that could be a bottleneck as well to be able to kind of streamline that process. So I think that's something that we need to look towards as well to make sure we can collect 10 million samples right now, but can it be processed in a timely manner?
Mm.
Or a timely and cost effective manner as well. Like, in a lab, anytime somebody touches a tube, that's a lot of money. So if we can kind of figure out those pieces and make a complete system, I think then the market really will take off. And then you can see this much more frequently and much more common practice with doctors. And you can see a doctor, like for your annual checkup, just having a kit and saying, here, grab this, put this on your arm, take a sample and send it away. And that just becomes common practice versus having that blood draw order or something like that.
Yeah, I mean that feels so logical and so
Yeah.
necessary, doesn't it? Which I love, to be honest. I love when we come across in this industry just really great products that the world clearly needs, and there's
Uh-huh.
obvious benefits. Whether that's just to, like you said, there's many groups of
Yeah.
patients that would benefit from this type of product, but there's also systems and workflows that can clearly be improved and
Right.
relieved of challenges by this type of product. And that's really what we want to see, isn't it, from it
Yeah.
through innovation, is those types of improvements.
Because I mean, you think about it, blood collection and blood, analytical testing hasn't really changed in the last 30 years. None. You go and get a venipuncture, they send it to the core lab, the core lab puts it on their instruments that have all been built for these tubes. And that's
Yeah.
the way it's been done. So there hasn't been a lot of innovation on that side of the fence. And I think this is where we can really we're going to innovate from the front to push the back forward in a way. So
Yeah, I've got two young kids, right? 2 and 4, and the thought of putting them through a blood collection for whatever reason would, it's not very nice, is it? Nobody's going to want to do
yeah,
that. And this kind of at home device that you could just help your child through quick, painless would just it'd be awesome. Also, as a Brit, it's great to hear that the NHS are leading, because they're not necessarily known for leading.
exactly.
But it's good that this is a
Yeah.
a portion of the industry that they're interested in innovation. That's great.
But I think probably, as you've seen, if you've ever gone to an NHS blood collection center, it takes some time. And so
Yeah,
if you can alleviate the pressure and the volume of people going there, like
yeah,
people are always going to need to go there for, some people might need 3 or 4 vials of blood, right? Okay. But if you just need something to test your lipids, why not have a kit shipped to your home and grab it? It would just take a lot of stress off the system as well. And I think post COVID, I think a lot of the systems have become very stressed. I
yes,
think I think we've lost a lot of very talented phlebotomists because of that, because the people that have been doing phlebotomy for 30 years, they retired. And those people that can find a vein with their eyes closed, they're all retired. And nobody's going into phlebotomy anymore. They're becoming more of generalized med techs or something like that, or X-ray techs. Phlebotomy isn't one of the sexy type of jobs to go into, so people aren't going into it. So any way we can kind of not have to have that super skill set and maybe use a nurse, just a standard nurse for it, that could be great as well.
Yeah, that's true. And I think maybe that is the Brit in me, because I always feel the number one challenge in the UK is stress on the system, right? It's a system that's just sort of bursting, right?
Yes.
And
Yep.
they constantly talk about wait times and stuff like
Mm-hmm.
this. That is just stress because of, a backlog of,
Yep.
of everything from the most simple, like this could be a blood draw for a routine, checkup, or it could be, very serious conditions and emergency cases. But then you talk about the US and the comparison that, as someone who's lived in the US for 9 years, I always think about rural areas or hard to get to areas as one of the biggest challenges. How does the person living in, an obscure location get the same treatment and access to someone who lives in a really well built up city that has, plenty of options? And they tend to be the two sort of main differences that I immediately think of when I think about the difference in the healthcare systems. And this would be great for both.
And I think on that point is even just kind of looking into like a clinical trial. When clinical trials are done in the US, they're always done in these kind of major cities, the same populations, and it's within driving distance. So what are you missing? Like, you're using the same patient base over and over again. You're missing the diversity of the rest of the country. So if you could even screen patients with this for a trial to be able to get more inclusive or more patients with a certain condition in, you could probably speed up your trial, number one, because you have a bigger footprint to get people from. And number two, make it more reasonable, because then they, instead of having to go to the main clinical trial site, time 0, 6 months, 12 months, maybe you can do time 0 and 12 months, but then in immediate, take a blood sample every month. And so you can kind of get more data and have a better trial and more data for the analysis by doing it that way. So there's a lot of ways you can play this together to really benefit the health system and drug development and or just general health indeed. So
fantastic. Well, Thomas, thank you so much for coming on and sharing an insight into RedDrop and your past and your take on the industry. I always love when I get to have these conversations and there's optimism and innovation, and this has all of that. So thank you for coming on and sharing the story. It was awesome.
Yeah, perfect. Thank you. Thanks for having me. And I love talking about this stuff. And I think we're at the cusp. You get those feelings when you've been in the industry long enough about when you start seeing everything start to build. And I think we're right at that inflection point now with kind of the micro collections and pushing blood collections out into the home and be able to do diagnostics from the home. So I think we're right at that kind of inflection point. So it's a very, very fun time to be in this space.
Awesome. Thanks, Thomas.
Perfect. Thank you. Have a great day.